Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories as per usual. I do want to test out something new for this video. For as long as horror narrations have been around on YouTube, it's always been the norm to have like background music or rain, fire crackling, just something along those lines. And I got to thinking tonight and I was just kind of like, why? So I was curious how a video would perform if there was no background noise at all. It's just me, the microphone, whatever's going on around me. I do live in a very big city, so you might occasionally hear like a car honking outside or people talking outside. Not that you'll be able to hear what they're actually saying, just things that would usually be masked by the background ambience that I add to my videos. I don't know of any channels that do this. I'm sure there are some, I just don't know of any. I don't really watch other narration channels, so I don't really know what's going on. I just kind of do my own thing, but I figured this might be a way to stand out, just do something a little bit different. And I can think of quite a few applications where this might be preferred, maybe better, just depending on what your preference is. Like, say you listen to my videos while playing video games. I would think that having a constant rain sound effect in the background could be distracting. It could be like something that takes away from the environment of the game that you're playing, so on and so forth. And I'm sure there's other applications where, again, this would be preferred. But it ultimately comes down to what all of you want and what all of you enjoy. So just let me know. Also, sorry if I look like crap. It's Sunday and it's like 2 in the morning. I've done nothing today. I've just like sat in my room, played video games. I've been playing a lot of Deadlock. Deadlock is really fun. I haven't shaved, showered, my hair is tied up. I've done nothing today. And I was like, yeah, today's a good day to get on camera. That's good. Sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. It all happened when I was on my way to visit my parents for some time away from the big city. My parents were always country folk who always loved to be out in the middle of the wilderness. As I was driving through the highway, it started to rain a little. Nothing I didn't really worry about. Tank was still full of gas, my music was on. It could have been much worse. But it did. Me and my big mouth, right? My car ended up making noises that didn't sound normal, as in it didn't sound like a car should be if it was working properly. I wasn't an expert on cars, but something told me to pull over. I ended up kicking my car in frustration as I exhausted pretty much all of my options on trying to get it moving again. I ended up realizing that I had to start walking, maybe find someone who could help me with this. I couldn't call my parents because my cell phone had no service. I was in the middle of nowhere. I had to hurry and maybe find some place I could spend the night. Maybe when the rain cleared up, I could sort out this car problem in the morning. After what seemed like hours of walking, I saw it. The hotel sat on a lonely stretch of highway, a flickering neon sign casting a sickly glow on the empty parking lot. At this point, I was desperate. My car had broken down miles from the nearest town, and the rain had turned into a downpour that had me soaked to the bone. Through the sheets of rain, the hotel loomed like a dark bruise on the side of the road, and I had no choice but to seek refuge. They always say hindsight is 20/20, but desperate people do desperate things. Inside, the place was even worse. The lobby was dim, smelling of mildew and something faintly metallic. The old woman at the front desk handed me a key with a smile that never reached her eyes, murmuring, "Room 13, the only one we have tonight." "Thanks, it'll do." Room 13. The number stuck to my mind. It felt unsettling, but I was exhausted and cold. I had no time to be picky or nervous. I just wanted to sleep. The room itself was no better than the lobby. Bare bulbs hung from the ceiling, and the wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing dark stains underneath. but it was a bed, and at that point, I would have slept anywhere. I tossed most of my wet clothes onto the floor, climbed under the covers, and closed my eyes, trying not to think about the faint, sour smell wafting up from the mattress. I hadn't been asleep long when the scratching started. At first it was faint. I thought it might have been the wind rattling against the old windows, or maybe an animal crawling around in the walls. I rolled over, pulling the pillow over my head, but the scratching grew louder. It was coming from under the bed. That's when I started to get a bit creeped out. The sound was too deliberate, too precise to be an animal. I told myself not to look, to stay in bed and ignore it, but as soon as I thought that, the scratching stopped. A few seconds later, the bed shifted. I was shaking slightly from the sudden movement. It wasn't much, just a faint movement, like something or someone was pushing up from underneath. I felt my stomach tighten as I lay completely still, hoping that whatever was down there didn't know I was awake. But then, just as I began to relax, I heard a whisper. "Come closer." I squeezed my eyes shut, barely able to breathe. The whisper came again, rasping and dry, like paper tearing in two. "Come closer. I need to tell you something." I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It felt like ice was filling my veins, freezing me in place. Then came a long, drawn-out sigh from beneath the bed, followed by a low, mocking laugh. "Fine. I'll come closer." The bed lurched, slamming hard enough to lift me up, and that was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I leapt out, scrambling toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. My hands were shaking too hard to turn the lock. I fumbled, feeling the growing pressure behind me, like someone standing close enough to touch, but before I could turn around, I heard the voice again, louder this time, whispering right next to my ear. "I just wanted you to know. It's not your bed you're sleeping in." My breath caught, my heart hammering as I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet. I fell against the bed, half expecting to feel something clawing at me from underneath, but there was nothing there, just silence and the dead, stale air of the room. In a panic, I ripped open the closet door, desperate for a place to hide. My mind raced. I had no phone, no working phone, no way to call for help, and the rain still hammered down outside, isolating me further. I crouched in the closet, heart pounding, trying to calm my breathing. But then I noticed the smell, a thick, cloying odor. It was metallic and wet, stronger now that I was in the closet. My stomach twisted as I looked down. There on the floor was a sticky, dark stain. It pooled beneath a pair of feet, their skin pale and mottled, visible under a tattered dress that hung from the figure like dead leaves. It was a woman, her face twisted in a silent scream, her arms contorted at unnatural angles. She stared straight ahead, her glassy eyes unseeing, or at least that's what I thought. As I watched her eyes flick to mine, the corners of her mouth stretching into a grin, and she whispered, "He doesn't like it when you hide." I stumbled backward out of the closet, my whole body screaming to run, but I couldn't take my eyes off her. She was still smiling, that awful, silent grin that seemed like it was stretching wider. Her lifeless eyes locked onto mine. My heart pounded as I backed away, feeling my way toward the door. But when my hand reached the knob, I found it was ice cold. So cold it burned. The air in the room was thick, almost suffocating, as if something was pressing down from every direction. I forced myself to look away from her, to try the lock again, but my fingers were stiff and clumsy from the cold. I twisted and pulled, but the lock wouldn't budge, no matter how hard I yanked. I was trapped. I was beyond terrified. A shuffling sound echoed from the closet. I didn't want to turn around, but some part of me had to. Against every ounce of common sense, I glanced over my shoulder. The woman in the closet was moving. She was crawling toward me inch by inch, her twisted arms scraping against the floor, her eyes wide and empty. As she dragged herself forward, her broken fingers left dark streaks in her wake, a trail of blood or something darker. "I tried to leave too," she hissed, her voice raw and brittle, as if it hadn't been used in years. "He doesn't let you go. He keeps you here." I backed into the corner near the door, feeling the wall cold and rough against my spine. My throat felt tight. My whole body locked in place as I watched her draw closer. Her eyes, hollow and sunken, had bored into me, full of something I couldn't understand. Rage, desperation, maybe even hunger. Then, just inches from my feet, she stopped. Her head jerked upward, and I felt a chill crawl down my spine as her gaze shifted, not at me, but at something behind me. "He's here," she whispered, a shiver in her voice. "He's always watching." I wanted to scream, to get out of this nightmare, but a noise stopped me. A soft creak, like the slow groan of a door opening. I forced myself to turn, and there in the shadowed corner of the room I saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, with limbs too long and bent in the wrong places. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It was draped in tattered black cloth which clung to its form like a shroud. Its face? It had no face. Just a smooth, pale surface, featureless but somehow filled with malice. The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, a cold, hollow presence that sucked the air from the room, but then slowly it raised one hand, pointing a single, bony finger directly at me. "He's chosen you," the woman rasped, her eyes wide with fear. She was backing away now, retreating into the darkness of the closet. "He always chooses someone, and once he chooses, he never lets go." "No," I whispered, the word barely audible. "No, stay away from me. No." But the figure took a step forward, the room growing colder with each movement, the walls seeming to close in. I could feel it pulling at me, dragging me toward it like an invisible hand clutching at my chest. My legs gave out, and I fell to my knees, staring up at that faceless horror as it loomed over me. Then I saw what looked like its mouth open. It didn't just open, it tore it open as if it were ripping open its very flesh. It was open in a silent scream. Then in a voice that sounded like nails scraping over glass, it spoke. "Stay," it said, the word echoing, filling the room. "Stay forever." My body went rigid, every nerve screaming to run, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, trapped under that thing's gaze, or whatever it was that served as its gaze. The shadows around me deepened, and I felt a weight pressing down on my chest, making it harder and harder to breathe. I tried to scream, to call for help, but no sound came out. The room spun, darkness creeping in at the edges of my vision, and just before I blacked out, I heard one last whisper, so faint I could barely make it out. "Room 13 always needs a guest." When I woke up, everything was quiet. I was laying in the middle of the floor, the stale smell of the room thick in my nose. My head ached, and every inch of my body felt like it had been crushed under a rock. For a brief moment I thought maybe I dreamed it all, that it had been some kind of feverish nightmare. But then I looked around and the room was empty. No twisted woman, no faceless figure, but the door was wide open, and outside I could see the early light of dawn peeking through the old hotel windows. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled to my feet, every instinct screaming to get out. My clothes were still damp. My car was still broken down, but I didn't care. I sprinted out of the room, down the narrow hallway, through the lobby, and into the rain-soaked parking lot. As I stumbled toward the road, I glanced back. The hotel loomed behind me, dark and silent, its sign flickering in the dawn light, but there, in the doorway, I saw a figure standing, watching me. It was the woman from the front desk. She raised a hand, giving me a slow, sad wave, and in that moment, I saw her face clearly for the first time. She looked like the woman from the closet, older perhaps, but unmistakably the same. Her eyes were hollow, empty, as if there was nothing behind them. She had that same smile that seemed just as hollow. And as I turned away, a chill ran down my spine because I swear I heard her whisper, drifting through the cold morning air, "We'll be ready for you whenever you decide to come back." I didn't look back. I broke into a full sprint. I kept running. I didn't stop until I was well down the highway, legs shaking, lungs burning. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the empty road. My mind was a blur, replaying every horrific detail, every sound, every face. Finally, a car pulled up, a beat-up pickup with a grizzled old driver, who took one look at my drenched clothes and haunted expression, and without a word opened the passenger door. "Trouble?" he asked as I climbed in, trying to catch my breath. "Yeah," I managed, voice hoarse. "Broke down, stayed at some hotel." I realized I didn't even know its name. He didn't say anything for a minute, eyes on the road. Then he asked, almost too casually, "That wouldn't have been the old highway hotel, would it? Little ways back, place with the busted up neon sign?" I felt a shiver roll over me and nodded. How did he know? He sucked in a breath. "Shame," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "Folks around here stay far from that place." I wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to know if he'd seen whatever it was that I'd seen, but the words stuck in my throat, and after a few minutes of silence, I felt myself slipping into an uneasy sleep, exhausted from the night before. I woke up with a deep yawn. We were parked outside a small gas station on what seemed like the edge of a small town. The driver was talking to a mechanic, pointing toward my broken down car, which he'd somehow managed to tow while I slept. He gestured me to get out, handing me an old thermos of coffee before saying, "This is as far as I go, kid. You'd do well to get in that car and keep going. Some places ain't worth visiting." I nodded, barely able to manage a thank you, and watched as he drove off, leaving me in a town I'd never been to before. The mechanic gave me a sympathetic look as he worked on my car, and for a long time, neither of us said anything. But just as he finished up, he glanced at me, a strange, unreadable look in his eyes. "You know, that hotel? Place has been closed for decades. Your friend told me about it. You should count yourself lucky. Not many people drive down that highway." I froze, my stomach dropping. "No, that's not possible," I stammered. "I was just there last night. There was a woman at the desk. I got a room." He gave me a wary look, like he'd heard this before. "You'd be surprised how many folks stay there, thinking it's real. I've heard stories like yours a dozen times over. Trust me, kid, whatever you think you saw in there was not real." I felt a chill wash over me. What happened there?" I forced myself to ask. The mechanic glanced around as if he didn't want anyone else to hear. Used to be a respectable place, that hotel, but something changed. Some say a guest went missing. Others say it was the owners, the husband and wife who ran it. One day, folks just stopped seeing them around. Only thing anyone knows for sure is that people who stay there, sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't. I wanted to protest, to insist that what I'd seen was real, but he was already closing up, giving me a look that said he didn't want to talk about it any further. I thanked him and got into my car, hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. As I drove out of town, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see something following me, but there was nothing. Just the empty highway stretching behind me, just miles of desolate road. Days went by and I tried to put the whole thing behind me, to convince myself it was just a nightmare. I tried to have a good time with my parents, but that night changed me. My dreams were plagued with whispers, scratching sounds, glimpses of pale, twisted figures, hiding in the shadows. I'd wake up in a sweat, heart racing, feeling that same suffocating pressure, as if something unseen was watching me. I decided to leave my parents' place a week early. They kind of already knew something was bothering me, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them. Maybe they knew about the hotel, but if they did, they would probably be like that mechanic. Probably would tell me to stay away or that what I experienced wasn't real. And then one night, as I was getting ready for bed after a long drive back home, I received a letter. It was placed right on my doorstep. I slowly picked it up. It arrived with no return address. The envelope was old and yellowed, as if it had been forgotten for years. I almost didn't open it, but something compelled me to. My hands shook as I slid the paper out, unfolding it to reveal 2 words, scrawled in faded ink. Room 13. I dropped the letter as my eyes widened and immediately ran to check every lock in my apartment. I even called the cops to have them do a full, thorough search. Nothing came of it. I swear it felt like I was losing my mind. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt that same chilling presence. That pressure building like something waiting for me to close my eyes long enough. In the days that followed, things got worse. Objects in my apartment would move on their own. A glass would slide across the table. The lights would flicker, and every so often, I'd catch a faint smell of mildew, that same metallic odor from the hotel room. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, that it was waiting for me to return to room 13. Finally, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I'd go back, just to prove to myself that it wasn't real, that I'd imagined it all. Part of me wishes that I had. I drove out to that same stretch of highway, my heart hammering as I neared the spot where the hotel should have been. But when I got there, I slammed on the brakes. I grew cold. The color drained from my face. No. The hotel was gone. There was no building, no flickering neon sign, not even a foundation to mark where it had been. It was just an empty lot, overgrown with weeds as if nothing had ever been there at all. My mind spun, grasping for answers, for anything to explain what I'd been through. But as I sat there in stunned silence, I saw something in my rearview mirror. A figure standing at the edge of the lot. It was the old woman from the front desk, her hollow eyes staring straight into mine, her face twisted in that sad, empty smile. I wanted to scream. I tried to turn to look directly at her, but by the time I twisted around, she was gone. I don't drive at night anymore. I moved what seems like countless times now. I can't sleep. I can't eat. People have tried to reach out and check up on me. I ignore them. I don't want whatever this is to affect them too. No matter where I go, no matter how far I try to run, I can still feel them, watching, waiting, and sometimes in the dead of night, when everything is silent, I can still hear that faint, rasping whisper. Room 13 will always need a guest. Mom, Dad, if you're reading this, I just want you to know I love you. I love you so much. And to whoever else is reading this, help me. Please help me. Every evening, at precisely 10 p.m., the man appeared in the window across from mine. I first noticed him on a foggy October night. I was pacing around my tiny apartment trying to work out a problem for a client, when my gaze wandered to the old building across the street. Through the dim haze, I could just make out a figure, barely visible, framed in the dusty glass of an upstairs window. At first, I thought nothing of it. He was probably just a neighbor, taking a quick look outside, but the next night, at exactly 10 p.m., there he was again, standing in that same spot, staring into the street. Something about the way he stood made my skin crawl. His face was barely visible, shrouded in shadow, but I could make out the pale outline of his eyes. He was watching me. I closed the blinds that night, uneasy, but every evening after that, no matter how hard I tried to ignore him, I felt his presence. Curiosity, or perhaps a growing sense of dread, got the better of me. Each night I would watch the clock, my heart pounding until the hour struck 10, and there he would be. Days turned into weeks, and the man never missed a night, always standing in the same spot, in the same eerie, unbroken silence. He never waved, never moved, just watched, as though waiting for something. One night I decided to wave to him. I wanted to see if he'd respond. As soon as the clock hit 10, I pulled back the blinds and raised my hand hesitantly toward the window. His eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I thought he was going to lift his own hand. Instead, his lips curled into a small, unsettling smile, revealing darkened, uneven teeth. My skin prickled. I quickly closed the blinds, trying to shake off the creeping chill that had settled over me. That was the first night I heard him. I had started drifting off to sleep when a faint tapping echoed through my apartment. My eyes snapped open, heart hammering. The tapping was steady, deliberate, like someone lightly tapping their knuckles against glass. I lay frozen, listening, trying to place the sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from my window. Slowly dreading what I might see, I turned toward it. Through the thin fabric of my blinds, I could make out a shadowy outline standing on the fire escape outside my apartment. A face pressed close to the glass. A wide, toothy smile just barely visible through the slats. My blood ran cold. I wanted to scream, but I was paralyzed. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it was just my imagination, that the man in the window was only a trick of the light, a shadow cast by passing cars. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. Somehow I managed to bolt upright, grabbing my phone and dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The dispatcher answered, her voice a steady anchor in the dark. I whispered, terrified he might hear me, that there was someone on my fire escape. Within minutes, I heard the wail of sirens. I didn't dare open my eyes until I felt the reassuring presence of the police officers. They searched the fire escape, the alley, the entire building, but found nothing. No footprints, no fingerprints, nothing to indicate anyone had been there at all. The officer suggested it was just a nightmare, a figment of my imagination, but I knew what I'd seen. I could still feel the weight of his gaze, the pressure of his face pressed against my window. That night, I barely slept, the man's smile haunting my every thought. The next day I tried to convince myself it was over, that he wouldn't return, but as the clock struck 10 I found myself unable to resist looking out the window. He was there, staring back at me from across the street. This time he looked different. His face was somehow clearer, his features sharper, more defined. His eyes were glassy and dull, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. And there was something else. He was holding up a piece of paper against the glass. It was small, yellowed scrap, crinkled around the edges. I squinted, trying to read the faint, scrawled words. "I'm watching." I stumbled back, heart racing, but when I looked again, the note was gone. The man was gone. The window across the street was empty, as though he had never been there at all. For days I waited, dreading the hour of 10 o'clock. The silence gnawed at me, filling my mind with dread, but after a week, when he didn't reappear, I began to hope that maybe it was over. One night, weeks later, I was drifting off to sleep when a loud knock jolted me awake. I froze, straining my ears, praying I'd imagined it. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was coming from my front door. My heart raced as I forced myself to get up, creeping slowly toward the door. As I got closer, I could hear something, a faint, rasping whisper, barely audible through the thick wood. "Let me in." The whisper was dry, hollow, like dead leaves scraping against pavement. I backed away, shaking. I turned on every light in my apartment, trying to drown out the darkness, the growing terror that filled me. The knocking continued, steady, rhythmic, unyielding. "Let me in." Desperate, I dialed the police again, but by the time they arrived, the knocking had stopped. The officers looked at me with pity, clearly doubting my story. They left soon after, telling me to call if I had any more trouble. For hours I sat in silence, barely breathing, waiting for the knocking to start again. But it didn't. I never heard it again. A few days later, I noticed the building across the street was empty. No lights, no movement. It was as though the place had been abandoned. Curious and maybe a little desperate for closure, I went over to ask around, hoping to learn something about the man in the window. The landlord, an elderly woman, looked at me with wide eyes when I mentioned him. "No one's lived there for months," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The last tenant, well, he disappeared. The police never found him. The only thing they found in the apartment was a note left on his window. It said, 'I'm watching.'" Her words chilled me to the core. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something. I could still feel his eyes on me, watching from somewhere unseen, waiting for the moment I'd let him in. My grandmother, when she was alive, lived on an old farm on the side of a hill in a remote village in northern Sweden, right next to a beautiful lake surrounded by mountains. Whenever we were there, we would spend all day swimming or fishing for perch and crayfish. Grandmother was, however, always very assertive that we must never get out on the lake during the night, though she never gave us any reason. I always assumed she worried that something would happen while no one was around to help. Of course, time passes, and last year, so did my grandmother. My grandfather died when I was very young, so my grandmother's passing left the house empty, and neither my mother nor any of her siblings were interested in moving out to the middle of nowhere. I, on the other hand, work remotely most of the time. And even though I don't really expect to keep the land, the solitude sounded quite appealing. Along with the house itself, I inherited furniture, a tractor, some old farming equipment, and, of course, the small wooden rowing boat we used to use whenever we were visiting. I have a single neighbor, a strange old man named Leonard, who lives in a small cottage further up the hill across the road from me. He mostly likes to keep to himself, but I have offered to let him use the boat if he wants to do some fishing, and to help out with clearing snow during the winter. One night after I had finally settled in, and was mostly unpacked, I stood by the window in the bedroom looking out over the lake. The moon was peeking out over the mountain opposite, and cast a beautiful glow on the still water. Suddenly I was reminded of my grandmother's warnings not to go out on the lake during the night. Curiosity got the better of me, and I made my way down to the boathouse. As I made my way down to the lake, I heard footsteps and a voice calling out behind me. Startled, I turned around to see Leonard. He seemed flustered and asked me, almost accusingly, why I was going down to the boathouse at this hour. Confused and a little annoyed at his sudden intrusion, I told him that I felt like taking the boat out for a little midnight trip, since this was such a beautiful night. He insisted that going out on the lake during the night was unsafe, had my grandmother not warned me. In hindsight, I feel extremely childish about this, but his insistence just made me more motivated. I told him that I was fully aware of the risks of taking a boat out at night, but that I was a grown adult and capable of making my own decisions. Leonard grumbled, and I could tell that he was still very agitated, but he relented and with a grunt and a dismissive wave, started making his way back up the hill. I pushed my boat out on the water and jumped in. The water was very still, and the combination of the moonlight and almost complete absence of any sounds made for an incredibly soothing experience. I settled around the middle of the lake, perhaps 300 meters from the shore. At this point, I could see most of the houses in the village and the neighboring village. Looking over toward my house, I suddenly realized that Leonard's cottage was entirely dark. He usually had some lights on in the windows, so that was certainly odd, but I could only assume that he had blown a fuse. Around me, the stillness of the water was disturbed by bubbles. Before I knew it, the water was filled with frenzied activity, and with a lurch, the boat suddenly started moving back toward the shore. I was moving significantly faster than my rowing had taken me out onto the lake, and I was holding on for dear life. I worried I would crash into the boathouse, but whatever pushed my boat along navigated it safely back to the spot where I would normally keep it moored, and it slid softly back onto the land. I stood up, scared and confused, and looked around. 3 dark and bloated silhouettes emerged from the water. In the moonlight, they looked almost like soldiers in ghillie suits, but they clearly wore no diving equipment. They approached swiftly and grabbed me. The creatures smelled vaguely of fish and decaying vegetation, and they spoke in a language I could not comprehend. I managed to make out a single word that was repeated multiple times. Mermelgard. They dragged me inside the boathouse. One of them looked me dead into the eyes and covered my mouth as it made a gargled, hushing sound. Its face was clearly not human, with bulging eyes without eyelids, 2 slits in place of a nose, and no visible ears. I realized it was in fact not wearing anything. However, its leathery dark brown skin seemed to mimic the appearance of decaying leaves. Of course, I was scared nearly out of my mind at this point, but for some reason I didn't attempt to flee. The creatures seemed almost as scared as I was. So I complied and kept quiet. They turned off the lights and settled down around me. We waited in there for what felt like an eternity, but was most likely only a couple of minutes. The silence outside was suddenly broken by a loud splash and the sound of wood splintering. I could hear that something was emerging from the lake, followed by heavy, damp footsteps. From what I could tell, it seemed to be moving up the hill as the footsteps were getting more and more distant. As I sat in that boathouse, My senses turned to max by all of the adrenaline coursing through my body. The sounds of breaking glass and splintering wood reached us. Eventually the footsteps returned, and whatever had come after us out of the lake made its way back into the water. A couple of minutes later, the three creatures that brought me into the boathouse quietly exchanged a few words. The one that had hushed me earlier gestured that I was free to leave, and then they left. I could hear them going back into the water. I fell back against the wall and slid down to the floor as my adrenaline abated, and the fear truly set in. I didn't move from that spot until the following morning. My house looked like a crime scene. The front door, along with its frame, had been torn out of the wall and lay several meters away on my lawn. Most of my windows and furniture were in pieces, and pools of water dotted the floor throughout the house. Leonard clearly knew more about the creatures that lived in the lake. I resented that he hadn't been more forceful in stopping me from going out with the boat. However, logically I knew I wouldn't have believed him if he had started going on about monsters. And what was he supposed to do? Nevertheless, I marched over to the cottage and banged on the door until he eventually opened it. He seemed both surprised and relieved that I was standing there, and he offered me a cup of coffee and an explanation. The lake is inhabited by a creature known as Mermelgard, and creatures known as the Vatnora. Generally, they live together in peace, but they have very different opinions on us humans. Leonard and my grandmother used to spend time with the Vatnora, and they understood some of their language. Their word for human roughly translates as foolish ones. They say that humanity are not mature, and they mostly settle with observing us. Mermelgard is an ancient creature that sleeps during the day and haunts at night. He is resentful of humanity for settling around his lake, eating his fish, and disturbing the darkness of the night with artificial lights. I still live in my grandmother's old house. Leonard has promised to introduce me to the Vatnora in their own time. I feel an obligation to thank them and to protect others from Mermelgard. I will never go out on the lake during the night again, but I feel strangely safe to do so during the day. I was told to be off the land before sundown. The park ranger was very adamant that I had to be gone by then tonight because that's when the park closed. He really emphasized tonight, which I thought was strange. But I followed his rule. I was the only person fishing the lake. It was beautiful and the fish were still biting, but I turned back plenty early. It was a decent walk on the trail because of the way the trail winds around the outer part of the property. I just got back to the truck when several vehicles pulled up to the parking area. "What the?" I said out loud. I could see the ranger in the entrance gate building, and he just let them through. Then several more came in. So much for the park closing by sundown. All the people getting out of the vehicles were elderly folks. I thought, what do these old people need the whole park for? It's a state park. They don't deserve the whole thing. I remember thinking some of these small town people around here think they own all this. But we all do, right? So F 'em. I grabbed my stuff and headed back out to the lake. I had time to get some more good fishing in. I figured no one would even notice I'm there, and I really wanted to bring home some keepers. God, I wish I could have just left. On my way back, I decided to go off the trail and cut through a part of the forest. I remember thinking, is this a good idea? Then continuing on my way. It really wasn't that bad at first, and I wasn't carrying that much other than a pole, a small tackle box, and a bucket. Though the fish were biting, they weren't big enough to bother bringing home, so my bucket was empty. The walk started to seem like it was taking a little too long when I noticed the sun was completely gone. The sky was black. It was a clear night, and there were stars, but there was no moon. As I went further, the ground was more and more covered in brush. It was tripping me up. With no light except for stars, only feeling my way through, it was like sinking deeper and deeper. Everything seemed larger, or I felt smaller. But I continued on as my instinct told me to. I got a strange chill and I stopped, froze completely, then I threw my gear down and froze again. Everything was silent for a moment. Then I heard a cracking noise. Probably a small animal, I thought. I heard the same noise but a little louder and closer. Then crunching and crackling surrounded me. And a large dark figure, the size of a tree, raised from the ground around me. It was like the forest was a giant moving being that had awakened, suddenly and angrily. A deep, low growl followed the crunching noise of the branches that were enclosing me. And then I was running. My feet taking me so quickly I couldn't comprehend it beginning. I don't remember the surroundings, just the feeling of the cool air and branches cutting against my face. Then, up a hill, a light. There was a small pavilion with lanterns around it, and a few picnic tables. People were all around talking casually. It was the old people I had seen earlier. The tables were set up with food and drinks. It was so surreal. But I was too panicked to care. I tried to speak, but was too out of breath. "Whoa, where'd you come from?" one person said. Still out of breath, I tried to reply. "Sorry, couldn't understand ya, buddy," he said before turning away from me, continuing to his conversation with the others at his gathering. It was all very odd and frustrating. Then I gathered myself enough to speak. "There is something," I said while pointing to the woods. Now they all paused their conversations and are looking at me curiously. "Something big is out there," I said. But confusingly to me, they all started smiling. I was irritated by them, thinking they thought I was crazy. "What are you all doing out here anyway? You've got to listen to me," I said. I glanced around at them as they just stared at me. Then they all started moving in a little closer. Okay. One of them said in a trying to be calming but condescending way. His hands motioned a "let's bring it down" kind of motion. I was annoyed and looked away from him and glanced over at their picnic table. A shiver went down my spine. That's when I actually got a look at what was on the table. It looked like raw meat. Hunks of flesh and foil pans and Tupperware containers. One with scalps, hair hanging over the side of it, and part of a human face inside it. They lunged toward me and pulled me to the ground with strength and speed unbelievable for the look of them. An old woman in a giddy voice said, "Our meager offering just got a little more tantalizing." The deep growl came out of the forest behind them louder this time than before. They turned and I broke free and ran. "No," yelled the woman that was so giddy before. But a man stopped her and snapped, "We have no time. Get into place." From a distance I watched a giant figure, dark as the night, emerge, horns or branches coming from it at all sides. They gathered to the sides of the pavilion, showing their offering. A man stepped forward and said, "Our Lord of the New Moon, please accept our offering for another month of youth." The figure engulfed the pavilion, but must not have been satisfied. The man that spoke screamed, and I could see blood gushing everywhere as if he were squeezed. I ran, found my way to the trail, sprinted the whole way to the parking lot, got in my truck and sped off. About a week has passed, and that night all seemed like nothing more than a dream. A really messed up dream. In fact, my luck has been pretty good since then. Work is going good. I work in an auto shop and my boss hasn't been on me all week like he usually is. I won $50 on a scratcher. Not much, but I'll take it. And I hit it off with this girl who brought her car in, which never happens to me. All seemed great in my week, which really had me questioning what I saw. At dinner, me and Heather, the girl I met earlier, were really getting along. She laughed at all my jokes, which is always a good sign since they aren't really that funny. Everything was great. Something about her seemed familiar. We were talking about where the rest of the night should take us. Then she said, "We could just head over to my place." I was all in. Then she said, "At home I can change into this new thing I bought." I was choking on my words, just nodding. Then she said, "It might be a little more tantalizing," with a giggle. The life fled from my body. Her voice, the word tantalizing, the way she said it, it was her. This was the old woman that was in the woods. They knew where to find me. They are probably going to kill me because of what I've seen. I'm in the restroom of the restaurant now. I think she might know that I know. My exit was less than graceful. I've peeked out the door to see if anyone else is watching, but I don't know. I don't know who to trust. That's why I'm reaching out for someone to believe me. I don't know who I know that will actually believe me. I'm afraid I might be kidnapped and fed to some woodland beast. I just moved into an old house in the middle of nowhere. It was cheap and I was desperate to get away from the city. I figured I could fix it up a bit, make it cozy, and live a quiet life. The basement was massive, filled with old furniture and boxes left by the previous owners. But there was this one door I couldn't open. It was rusted shut, and no amount of force would budge it. It was only a week ago that I finally decided to break it open. I grabbed a crowbar, thinking maybe there was a small storage space behind it. I was wrong. The door swung open with a loud, creaking moan, and the smell hit me instantly. It was like rot mixed with something sickly sweet. I gagged, but my curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and peered inside. The room was small, cramped, and the walls were lined with old, yellowing photographs. They were of people, hundreds of them, men, women, children, all staring blankly at the camera, but the thing that made my skin crawl, they were all missing their eyes. I wanted to leave right then, but something caught my eye. In the corner of the room was an old, dusty box. It was the only thing in there that wasn't covered in cobwebs. I shouldn't have opened it. Inside were dozens of small glass jars, each one containing something dark and shriveled. My flashlight flickered, and I thought I heard whispering, like tiny voices coming from the jars. I don't know why, but I picked one up, and when I looked closer, I realized what was inside. An eyeball. I dropped it, and it shattered on the floor. That's when the whispering turned into a low, guttural growl. I backed up, ready to run out of the basement, but the door slammed shut on its own. The lights in the room flickered and went out completely. I was plunged into darkness, but I could feel something moving, crawling around the room. I switched my flashlight back on, but it was dim now, barely lighting up the room. That's when I saw them. Faces, all around me, pressing against the walls, their eyeless sockets staring straight at me. Their mouths moved, whispering, but it was like they were speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I thought I was going insane. I ran to the door and started banging on it, screaming, but the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. I turned around and one of the faces was inches away from me. It smiled a sick, twisted grin, and I could finally make out what it was saying. "Thank you for letting us out." The door burst open and I stumbled out, sprinting up the stairs. I slammed the basement door shut and pushed a dresser in front of it, but I could still hear the whispers on the other side. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, clutching a kitchen knife, waiting for whatever was down there to try and get out. I called a locksmith the next day to have the door sealed shut. but when he arrived, he told me there was no basement door. I took him down there and it was gone. Just a solid wall where the door used to be. I haven't gone back down there since. I hear things at night, scratching, like nails on a chalkboard, coming from beneath the floorboards. Sometimes I catch whispers, faint and distant, echoing through the house. And every morning there's a new photograph slipped under my bedroom door. They're pictures of me, and in every one, my eyes are missing. My name is Nick Bannon. I'm about 6 feet tall, skinny build. My curly hair and eyebrows are a dark brown, and my eyes are bright blue. A strange start to my story, I know, but it's only because I know the inevitable. It's going to happen again. I don't know where, and I don't know who to, but I have a feeling it's been happening for a while. I'm just another small link in a long, long chain. If there's a photo in your home that matches the description above, you're in danger. All I can advise is that you get out. Get out as fast as you can and share my story with somebody, anybody who will believe you. I've written it out below as quickly as I could under the circumstances. I don't think I have much longer. It's going to find me soon. My mother died 2 months ago. Lung cancer. We weren't very close, especially at the end, but I'd been the only family she didn't despise. Because of this, the majority of her possessions were left to me. This included an old blue truck, a storage unit full of tattered furniture and old clothes, and a split-level house at the end of a long country road. The house itself was in okay shape. There were some exterior walls that looked a bit rough, but it was old. Good bones, as they say. I decided I'd move into it, at least for the time being. I was between jobs and it felt as good a place as any to crash for a little bit. I packed what few belongings I had from my crappy studio apartment and left the city in my rearview mirror. Things were normal for the first few days. It felt good to be away from the chaos that I'd grown accustomed to. My closest neighbor was 2 miles away, and I barely saw any cars drive by. I'd forgotten the value of silence from time to time. However, pretty quickly it got to the point where it was too silent. Soon every creak made me jump, every gust of wind sounded like an intruder, and it was driving me crazy. I decided that I needed a project, something to fill the silence, pass the time. I had a lot of it these days. I looked around at all my mom's tacky, inspirational wall hangings and her dated velvet furniture, and decided that it felt too much like her in there. If I was going to live there, I was going to make it mine. I had a yard sale that had a pretty great turnout, despite my isolated location. Pretty much everything went, and what didn't get sold got donated to a local thrift store. I shampooed the carpet, painted the walls, tended to the garden, all things that Mom probably hadn't done in years. By the time I was finished, the entire house almost looked brand new. I bought some new furniture with the yard sale money, threw up a few horror movie posters, and soon enough this place was starting to feel like mine. It had been easy to get rid of Mom's stuff because, quite frankly, most of it had been ugly. The only things that stuck around were her framed portraits, the ones that climbed the stairs. They were family photos. A dozen semi-familiar faces dotted them sporadically, and I found myself staring at them from time to time, wondering what they were up to now. It felt odd. I'd been alone for so long that the thought of a family this big being my family didn't make sense in my head. I started getting in the habit of greeting them each morning. I know it sounds weird, but grief is a strange thing. I felt comfort in it. As I'd been clearing out everything, I'd found a family photo album. Using that, I'd been able to match a lot of the names to faces. Aunt Grace popped up a lot throughout the frames, as did my Uncle Rob. I even saw myself as a baby a few times. It took a while, but soon I had each of them memorized. That's why I noticed the new photo almost instantly. Every single one of the frames had a thick, black frame, no matter the photo size. It gave the wall a nice, uniform look. Mother had liked them that way. The new one stood out from the rest. It was made up of plastic roses, each one a different shade of red. The image inside of the roses was of a woman. She was ice skating alone on some pond, surrounded by brush and thick snow. The photo was taken from a few yards away, through the branches of a dead tree. It was like a photographer had been crouching a few yards away, hiding. When I went to take the frame off the wall, I was met with wetness. The entire frame was covered in some sort of thick, clear goo that had started to pool on the stairs. My stomach churned at the sight of it. I took my shirt off and used it as a sort of glove to carry it to my kitchen table. I stared at it for a long time. Half of my brain was searching my early memories for the skating woman. Maybe she was a long-lost relative, or maybe a friend of Mother's. But that wouldn't explain the photo showing up out of nowhere. I'd passed that photo wall dozens of times, and I was almost certain that it hadn't been there before. It also wouldn't explain that disgusting goo. At that point, I was weirded out and confused, but I wasn't scared. I'd heard about strange things happening in the woods, how it can play tricks on your mind. That had to be it. I tossed the frame into the garbage. I didn't want it anywhere near me. I thought that'd be the end of it. Just a strange occurrence, nothing more. That morning I skipped saying hello to the photos. There was an imposter. It didn't feel right. Later that day, I decided to take the truck into town and run a few errands I was putting off. I needed to get out of the house. It felt like I had that disgusting goo all over me, even after a shower. Being in town helped a little bit, but not much. At the convenience store, the cashier picked up off my mood. "You doing okay, sweetie? You look pale," she said, bagging my groceries. I lied and told her I was fine, and forced our conversation to turn towards the weather. "I'm just getting sick of these storms," I said. "I know some people say they help them sleep, but not me." The woman gave me a weird look. "Storms? What storms? It's been bone dry for weeks. You sure you're okay?" "Oh, yeah, I'm fine," I stammered, grabbing my groceries. I hurried out of there and got in the truck. What had she meant by no storms? I'd been seeing lightning every night pretty much since I moved in. Maybe she lived in a different county. Yes, that had to be it. I drove around for an hour or two before heading back. The skating woman wouldn't leave my head. When I finally returned to the house, it had started to get dark. Nighttime out in the middle of nowhere was no joke. I brought the groceries in and put them away. I cooked a small chicken dinner, cleaned the dishes, and shut the house down for the night. I needed to sleep. It wasn't until I went to shut off the front porch lights that I noticed it. The photo of that skater. It was back in its place on the wall, right along with the others. A fresh layer of goo was dripping off of it like slimy teardrops. All right, I thought. Now I'm scared. I didn't end up getting much sleep that night. I laid in bed and stared at the ceiling in a daze. The sounds of the old house sounded even louder in the dark. There wasn't a storm, at least not one that I noticed. In the morning, I checked every single nook and cranny in this house. I looked for any sort of explanation on who'd moved the photo while I'd been gone. It had to be an intruder, but there were no signs of forced entry. The windows had been rusted shut years ago, so there was no chance of someone shimmying in that way. All of the doors had been locked as well, deadbolted. Outside, I saw no footprints or tire marks that weren't the truck's. Nobody else was here but me, at least according to the physical evidence. After a paranoid few hours of searching, I got fed up. I started a fire in the backyard and threw the photo into it. It almost sounded like it was screaming as it went up in smoke. I stood there until I was sure it was charred beyond repair before I doused the flame. The next day I had someone from SPC Security come out and install a home alarm system, complete with a tablet that controlled its every move. It was very fancy. The man showed me how to arm and disarm the system and helped me create an access code. After he left, I felt a bit better. At least now I'd know if something in the house was moving while I wasn't. The photo hadn't returned, thank God, but I still felt weird about the photo wall. What had once given me comfort now felt wrong. I took the photos down and put them in a box that I shoved into a closet. The stairwell looked bare afterwards, like I'd ripped all of its teeth out, but I felt good. It felt like I had things under control. That night, I got into bed with the security tablet lying on my bedside table. I armed the house with my access code, and I drifted off to sleep as the lightning began once more. The alarm clock read 3:45 a.m. when I was startled awake. There was a sound. I squinted through the pitch black, still half asleep. I couldn't see anything. Whatever it was loud, really loud. The sound was like a blend of a sick, puking cat and a human cough. I rubbed my eyes with some force and peered into the darkness again. As my eyes began to adjust, I saw it. In the corner, something was there, crouching, vibrating, twitching. It was hard to make out its shape in the dark. It looked human. At least, it was big enough to be one. The only thing I could see was a tiny red light, right where its eyes should be. Terror had stapled me to my bed. Every fiber of my being wanted to tear out of there, but that thing was right by the bedroom door. This time it was louder. I saw it retch over, like it had been punched in the stomach. It smacked its lips as its shoulders twitched back and forth with the sound of crunching, shifting bones. I noticed the security tablet sitting next to me. Earlier, the guy had said that if I hit the side button 3 times, the police would automatically be called. It was about a foot away from my reach. Moving as slow as I could manage, I stretched my arm across the bed. My fingers grazed the edge of the screen. I pressed down and started to drag it towards me, but instead of falling onto the bed, it fell onto the floor with a soft clunk. The shape in the corner jumped up onto its feet with a sharp, guttural inhale. It looked over at me. I made eye contact with its eye light. We were both still for a moment, studying each other, until it darted from the room and out into the hallway. I heard a faint sound before the ear-piercing alarm began to go off. It must have moved enough to trigger it. With tears in my eyes, I reached down to the tablet and shakily clicked the side button 3 times. I waited out by the road for the cops. The further from the house, the better. Whatever it was still in there. Since I lived so far from town, it took longer for the local sheriff to reach me. I'd started to shiver by the time I saw the lights through the trees. The town was small enough to only have a sheriff and a deputy, and they'd both shown up for my call. "So you saw an intruder in the house?" the sheriff asked. He seemed doubtful. Nothing of that sort happened out here in the sticks. I was sure these guys had never dealt with any real crime. "Yes, I think he's still in there, upstairs." The sheriff went inside to look around while the deputy surveyed the property. I remained in my spot by the mailbox. I probably looked crazy, standing out there alone in nothing but my boxers, but I didn't care. My heart hadn't stopped its incessant beating, and a cold sweat had formed on my brow. I was just focused on not passing out in front of those cops. After what felt like years, the sheriff exited the house and met back up with his partner. They exchanged a few words I couldn't hear before coming to join me again by the road. The sheriff spoke first. "The house is clear, sir. I looked everywhere. Checked all the windows, everything. No signs of forced entry." "I didn't saw nothing neither," the deputy tacked on. "I checked everywhere. No footprints. Nothing. It's just you here, sir." I couldn't believe my ears. I wanted to force them back inside, make them check again, make them see what I saw. But I saw that look in the sheriff's eye, concern mixed with secondhand embarrassment. Here I was, a paranoid guy in his underwear, lamenting about an intruder in his isolated house. If I kept it up, they might just take me back to the tiny station downtown. I decided to lie. "I'm embarrassed, officers. I apologize. My mom died recently, and I must be seeing things. I'm exhausted." The officers looked at me, then at each other. The deputy took a step forward and put a hand on my bare shoulder. "It's all good, boy. You's mom was a town gem. Everyone loved her. We did at the station, too. She had her fair share of calls down to the station. Was never anything, though. Seems like the apple don't fall far from the tree. Right, Sheriff?" The sheriff was not as polite as his deputy. "Get back inside and get some sleep. It looks like you need it. Good night, son. Sorry for your loss." I waved goodbye with a still shaking hand as they turned around in my driveway. On their way out, the detective slowed to a stop right by me. He held a flyer out the window. "Hey, I promised the family I'd hand these to everyone I came across. Keep an eye out, will ya?" They drove away and disappeared into the trees. I unfolded the flyer. It was a missing poster. There was a thick block of text above a photo. Missing, Julia Helms. Age, 32. Last seen, near Copperhead Woods. Any information should be reported to 1-555-685-0928. I recognized the face in the photo. I'd watched it burn in my fire pit earlier that day. Mother's house had become a threat. I couldn't sleep. I could barely eat. I stopped opening the windows in the morning and maintained coffee to stay awake. I patrolled the house with a hammer in one hand and a baseball bat in the other. Overkill, I know, but what else could I do? After some digging online, I found an article about the missing woman, Julia Helms. According to the Slow Turtle Gazette, she owned a local hobby store called Sue Cheek and had been an avid ice skater. Just last year, she'd won a national title. In the attached photos, she was smiling the same way she'd been on my wall. I began to see that face everywhere, especially when I shut my eyes. It was etched into everything. I was in a strange position. What was I going to do? Go down to the station and tell those cops that something was living in my house? That it was leaving pictures of a missing woman on my walls? They'd definitely take me in then, especially considering my little stunt the other night. I didn't even have the photo anymore. Even if I did, having a previously on-scene photo of a woman the day she went missing wasn't a good look. That wasn't all. There was something else that I kept coming back to. Something that I just couldn't let go of. The angle. The way the photographer had been hiding, waiting. It did the same in my home for 3 days before it showed up again. I'd gone to the shop again that morning for food. Julia's missing posters were taped on every light pole in town. I tried not to look at them, but I still saw her in my periphery. That smile kept passing me at 30 miles per hour, punching me in the gut each time. Mindful of the groceries in the bed of the truck, I slowly upped my speed until I was back in the thick forest. Nobody bothered with the posters out here. As I approached the house, I noticed something in the front yard. Little bits of white were strewn across my front lawn, like confetti. I parked the truck and approached my porch with extreme caution. The little pieces were everywhere. I picked one up and held it up close, making eye contact with half of my Aunt Grace's smiling face. Mother's photos. Once the heart of the house had been torn to pieces and cast out carelessly on the grass. Some pieces got caught in the wind and blew up and out into the trees. The inside of the house was trashed. It was like a tornado had come through and destroyed everything in its path. The fridge had been ransacked. The food was thrown on the walls and smeared into the windows. Furniture was upside down. Pillows were ripped open and gutted. There was also the goo coating the floor, making it slippery. It was like the trail a snail leaves behind. I tried not to vomit as I made my way through the first floor, a butter knife clasped in my shaking hand. Don't laugh. It was the only weapon I could find on short notice. In the hall closet, the box that I'd put the family photos in was shredded. I checked to see if any survived the carnage, but there weren't any. That thing had taken each of the photos out of the frames and destroyed them. I couldn't figure out why, though. What did it want with the frames? A sound upstairs caught my attention. I rounded the corner just in time to see something tumble down the stairs. It was the security tablet, shattered. I picked it up, wincing as a piece of broken glass got shoved into my thumb. It coughed again, closer this time. It was coming from upstairs. I dropped the tablet onto the ground where it landed with a splash in a pile of goo. There at the top of the stairs, I saw it. It was shrouded in the darkness of the upstairs hallway, but it was there. I saw its skinny, vibrating body. I saw its bright red eye. I saw... The photo wall. It was back. The frames were hanging again, although crooked. All 24 of them were there. They covered in a dripping mess that ran down the wall in thick ropes. Now, though, instead of the smiling faces of my family, all I saw looking back at me was me. They were all photos of me, sleeping. In each one the flash was bright enough to wash my skin out. I remembered those nights, all that lightning. It held up its bony hand to block the sun from its eye. There was something embedded in his palm, a sort of glass ball. It glistened in the light. A glass bulb in its palm was inches from my nose. I heard nothing besides the sound of a small whirring, like something winding up. It was the last thing I heard before I was blinded. I'm not too sure how to describe this next part. It's going to sound crazy, but it's the stone cold truth. The thing in its hand, I guess you could say it's a camera. Or maybe it itself is a camera. I still don't really know for sure. When I came to, the thing had started shaking. It held on to the railing for support as it jerked from left to right, sending dribbles of its spit all over the entryway. I'd backed myself into the corner of the room as far away as I could get. My head was pounding. Terrified, I crossed my arms and folded my legs up into my chest. I wanted to make myself as small as possible. I wanted it all to be over. I wanted my mother. Through my shaking fingers, I watched the thing stumble its way down the final few steps on all fours. It was still coughing, arching its back like a sick cat with each heave. After a few heavy purges of goo, I saw something fall out of its throat and onto my carpet. It was a photo. It was my photo. My horrified face took up the entire page. The thing grabbed the paper from the ground and flattened it. It looked at me with that bright eye for a few moments before reaching over and tossing it in my lap. I noticed what looked to be a smile creep up on its thin lips. It seemed proud of its work. Before I could even think about my next move, I swung the butter knife. It landed with a dull thunk somewhere on the side of its thick head. An inhuman wail spilled from its wet mouth as it backed into the wall with force. The crash rattled some of the photos of my sleeping body tumbling off the wall. I snuck past the thing as it tugged at the knife handle in its face, taking the steps 2 at a time. An armoire that my mother had bought ages ago still stood in her old craft room upstairs. It was big enough for me to just barely fit inside. I climbed in and shut the doors quietly. I've been in here ever since. Like I said at the top, there isn't much time for me. There aren't a lot of hiding places in this house. It's sure to pull open the armoire doors at some point in time. What happens to me then, I'm not sure. Perhaps I'll face the same fate as Julia Helms. Perhaps I'll find a way to escape, although that seems doubtful. There's a crack in the door of the armoire. As I've been writing, I've peered through it and witnessed that thing pass through this room a few times. Each time it brings one of the frames from the wall and adds it to a line it started on the floor. It's laying each one out. At first I wasn't sure what it was up to, but I think I know now. I remember Julia's photo, the frame of roses that it lived in. I think that thing forced her to choose a frame for her photo, and now it was setting me up to do the same. Not that I'd have much choice. Mother had liked the uniform black after all. Please remember. My name is Nick Bannon. I'm about 6 feet tall, skinny build. My curly hair and eyebrows are a dark brown, and my eyes are bright blue. If you see me in your home, in a thick black frame, be cautious. Tell mine and Julia's stories. And if this thing comes for you next, I hope you can kill it. I only wounded it, it seems. It happened abruptly on a plane. I was woken up by some turbulence, and instead of going back to sleep, I stood up and demanded the nearest stewardess to bring me some sugar water. My voice was coarse, and I could feel every muscle tense across my body, as if I was preparing to do a backflip. After crushing a Mountain Dew, I practically barked like a dog. More sugar. It was terrifying. Something awful had seized all executive functions of my brain. That's the best way I could put it. It's like my consciousness got kicked out of the driver's seat and was forced to watch everything from a cage. I could still see and hear and feel every sensation in my body. I just had no input, no control over what I did. Ma'am, please calm down. We'll get you some soda. Sugar me now. Horror quickly blended with embarrassment. I guzzled a dozen soft drinks in less than 3 minutes, which resulted in vomit all over my pants. People gasped, got up and moved away. I became that woman on the plane. Do we have to restrain you, ma'am? Not if sugar I more have. Instead of heading home towards my husband and 2 daughters in Toronto, I went straight to the travel counter to book a new flight. Lost Angels. Excuse me, ma'am? Plane me. You'd like to book a flight to Los Angeles, is that right? Despite shaking in broken monosyllables, everyone was very willing to help. Now don't get me wrong, I'm very thankful that I live in a very progressive, nice part of the world that somehow tolerates strange speech and vomit-stained pants. But for once, I just wanted someone to call me out for a random screening. I wanted someone to detain the insanity controlling my body. Instead, I helplessly watched my visa get charged a fortune. First class, extra leg room, next available flight. Upon arriving in California, a group of women dressed in very fancy blazers held out a sign for me. The sign said Simone, which was my name. The palest one wearing cat-eye sunglasses approached with a glossy-toothed smile. Hello, gorgeous. How was the flight? Divine, the thing controlling me said. Good, let's freshen you up. In public, the women laughed and talked about fictional renovations. Everyone would take turns talking about sprucing up their patio, or how they were building a yoga den. In private, however, the women spoke in wet, gagging noises, as if they were trying to make speech sounds not designed for human mouths. The whole car ride from the airport, I was engulfed in drowning duck sounds. As a means of distraction and potential escape, I tried to focus on what was being squawked. But that got me nowhere. The language was indecipherable. The one who wore a sun hat which obscured her eyes was honking at me especially. Honk. she said, pointing at me over and over again. The only consistency I could make out in their language is that whenever they spoke to the sunglasses leader, they would make the same double gagging sound, guac guac. And so, imprisoned in the back seat of my brain, I mentally started to make notes. The leader I will call Gigi. My name is Hronk. As we swerved through a busier commercial district, Gigi slowed her driving. In fact, everyone in the minivan became quiet and started scanning the surroundings. The car pulled over a curb near a preacher who was proselytizing by a rack of pamphlets. He might have been a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness. Gigi stepped out first, followed by what I would call her right-hand loyalist, a woman who perpetually wore a violet scarf. From the crack of my window, I watched Gigi and Violet introduce themselves as fellow evangelicals. They said we were all going to a public prayer, and that we could use more preachers outside to attract attendees. "That's very kind of you to invite me," the man said, "but I'm used to just sticking to my corner here." They insisted and said it was all for the greater good, but the man still politely declined. "You should know something," Gigi said, and took off her sunglasses. Something in her eyes had the man absolutely captivated. "We are angels, sent by God." There was a pause. The preacher continued to stare without blinking. "You're what?" "And we're having a congregation." The car's windows rolled down, revealing our 6-woman crew. At this point, I should mention that before I became body snatched, and before I became a mom, I was a fashion model for many years. In fact, all of these possessed women looked like idyllic models. With their long, shiny hair and unblemished faces, we were basically a postcard for Sephora. "You," the preacher gawked at all of us. "You're angels?" He didn't object when Violet grabbed his rack of brochures and placed it in the trunk, and he also didn't object when Gigi led him into the passenger seat in front of me. The car doors closed and we were off again in seconds. "So does this mean the end times are near?" He was visibly stunned, laughing. Violet, who sat beside me, secured a gold ring along her finger. A dart-like needle protruded from it. "Something like that." She slinked an elbow over his shoulder and stabbed the ring into his neck. "Ow, hey, what is that?" Violet pulled away. "What, this? It's Bulgari, off Saks on Ventura." "Why does it burn?" The man clasped his wound, patting it as if it were on fire. After a few squirms and moans, he fell completely limp. All the women honked an aggressive, nasal sound. A celebration, the thing controlling me joined in, honking at full volume. The abandoned hotel they inhabited was somewhere between Los Angeles and Bakersfield. It was hard to be precise because my eyes weren't always looking out the window. "Let me give you the grand tour," Violet said. Or at least that's what I assumed the seal-like barking coming from her mouth meant. The foyer was filled with flats upon flats of energy drinks. Monster, Red Bull, Rockstar, and dozens of other brands that all looked the same. Our bedrooms looked all like normal hotel bedrooms, except there were massive locks on the outside handles. Violet also gave me a peek at the rooftop balcony patio, where I wish I could have averted my gaze, or closed my eyes, instead of staring right at the pile. There were about 24 bodies, each one lifeless, each one dressed in very nice clothes, their Sunday best. The preacher was dumped to the back half of the pile, the side with all the priests. It reeked bad as some of the corpses were clearly decomposing, but the thing controlling me wasn't bothered by the smell. Violet laughed her goose honk laugh and took me downstairs. It was in the dining room where everyone stood in a circle, awaiting my arrival. Formerly, this must have been a space where they held buffets and parties, but now it was just a completely bare room with energy drinks and glass pipes on the floor. Gigi came up and handed me a 4-pack of Guinness tall cans. The thing controlling me proceeded to guzzle each one. For the first time, my conscious state became fuzzy. The jet lag and sleep deprivation was finally catching up. I slowly brought myself to the floor. The rest of them smiled and honked as my hands curled beneath my head. I fell asleep. A kick to the stomach woke me up. I rolled away and grimaced, staring at the black Prada heels worn by Gigi. It was a full minute of reflexive dodging before I realized that it was now me who was crawling and sniveling. The real me. I was moving my own limbs and shielding my face. I was shriveling up in a corner and screaming like a maniac. Please, let me go. Please. Somehow, the thing controlling me fell asleep. I was able to take command again. The honking entities surrounded my corner and nudged another frightened young woman towards me. I had never noticed her before because she had worn that massive sun hat that whole day. It was Shula. I was so caught off guard, I barely realized that I had control over my speech, too. Shula? She used to work at the same modeling agency as me, and we often booked the same gigs because our skin tones were complementary. We even did a big eyeliner commercial for MAC once. You have to do everything, exactly as I say. Shula's MAC eyeshadow now streamed down her cheeks. She looked as sorrowful as I felt. If you don't listen, they'll only hurt us more. I stood up in my corner, eyeing the 4 other possessed humans. Their pupils were all dilated, probing me with intensity. What do you mean? I asked. Shula's head hung low. This is your initiation. They want us to fight. Fight? She stood up with reluctance and rolled back the sleeves of her oversized sweater. We are going to have to make it look like I beat you up. What? No, Shula, I'm not fighting you. It's not up to us. You have to do it. I wasn't about to fight in some perverted boxing match, so I decided to run. I tried to bolt to my left, past Violet, who was watching Shula, but the entity's reflexes were too quick. Violet seized my wrist and hurled me against the back of the room. I slammed into a vinyl counter, breaking a nail, but miraculously, not my skull. By the time I stood up, the circle of women had surrounded me again. There's no escape, Simone. Shula curled both her fists. Her sadness looked terrible and deep. You need to fight. To show you're strong. Let's get it over with so they don't toss you. Toss me? Shula nodded, fighting back tears. They've tossed bad picks before. Weaklings. So you have to put up a fight to show you're worthy. I don't want them to toss you. I looked at the counter behind me. It was adjoining a kitchen. I didn't know how long my free will would last, and I also didn't know if I would ever have it again. I could have made many other decisions, but the mantra in my head was, escape now or die trying. Although their reflexes were quick, I thought maybe if I vaulted fast enough, I could grab a kitchen knife in time to properly retaliate. So that's what I tried to do. I flipped myself over into the kitchen, and this time no one grabbed my wrist. Scrambling off the linoleum floor, I shot past the fridge and industrial sink. I shot past the walk-in freezer and fryers, but footsteps weren't far behind. By the time I reached another exit, someone grabbed my hair. You have to fight. Shula screamed and dragged me to the ground. In seconds, I was pinned with a ladle against my throat. She held a knee onto my stomach. That's it. Just thrash around a little. It doesn't have to last long. I flipped her over and grabbed her ladle, putting it on her own throat instead. Shula may have been taller, but she did not have tennis lessons with her kids. No, Simone, they can't see you beat me. I pressed on the ladle like I was testing one of my rackets. I was single-minded in escaping, and if it meant I had to choke out my friend, then that's what I had to do. You've got to stop. Please, please. Her strength was fading, but I held on. It was only once her cheeks had turned blue that I finally let go. Gigi bent over next to me with a smile. Well done. What a fine vessel Ergic has chosen. My friend lay passed out on the floor. I stood with 4 smiling women who all smirked and patted my back. Flats of drinks were open in the foyer. They handed me rock stars like candy, honking and ululating in some kind of trance. All the while, Gigi held onto my shoulder, not seeming to care that I was still Simone. Her squeal whispers felt like slugs entering my ear. A new supplicant for thee, soon ours, one and all. During the chanting ceremony, Violet's purple scarf was taken off her neck and then wrapped around my own. The entities circled around me. They bowed and breathed at me, anointing me with their exhalations. Gigi took me to my room and squawked to the entity inside me. I could feel it trying to wake up, playing a cerebral tug-of-war with my body. Then Gigi looked in my eyes without her sunglasses. She didn't have pupils like a normal human. She had the grid-like ommatidia of an insect. You are now Ergic's tool, human. This is a high honor. Ergic is vice praetor of the Old Ones. The thing controlling me, or Ergic, had briefly seized control of my head and nodded. Gigi put sunglasses over her eyes to speak to me, the real me directly. Cooperate with Ergic, and you will triumph. Resist, and we'll toss you like the others. Understood? I didn't know what to say. Gigi squeezed and held onto my cheek like I was some toy. Then she left without a word and turned all 6 deadbolt locks. I wasn't certain, but I had a feeling that if I fell asleep, I would lose all control again, that Ergic would reassert himself. That's why I was left here with more beer cans around me. They wanted me to doze off. I had to stay awake. There was a discarded laptop in the room. It was probably planted to test my allegiance or entrap me, but I didn't care. I used it to email my husband and people I trusted. I told them I was taken hostage somewhere in California, and that I needed their help. I told them my kidnappers were part of some bizarre cult, but I didn't tell them about my possession, the preacher, or any of the crazy body-snatching stuff. I didn't want them to think I was insane. They would never believe me, but hopefully you do. That's why I also posted this here. If you live between Bakersfield and LA and have ever driven past a pink, run-down motel, please call the police. Send someone. Save me before the thing controlling me takes over again. It started on a Wednesday. I remember that because nothing ever happens on a Wednesday. I was at work, sitting in my cubicle, scrolling through emails when I felt it. A sharp tug in my mind, like something had clicked out of place. It wasn't much, just a fleeting sensation, but it was enough to make me stop mid-scroll. I blinked, shook my head, and kept going. It was nothing, probably stress. But on my way home that evening, the world felt different. It wasn't obvious at first. The bus ride was the same, with the same people. The woman in the red coat, the old man with his briefcase, the kid with headphones too big for his head. They were always there, except today, they weren't quite right. The woman in the red coat kept glancing at me, her eyes darting away every time I caught her looking. The old man gripped his briefcase tighter than usual, his knuckles pale, and the kid, he wasn't listening to music. I could hear the static leaking from his headphones. Just static. No rhythm, no melody, just white noise. When I got off the bus, I felt eyes on me. That prickling sensation that makes you glance over your shoulder to see if anyone's following, but no one was there. Everyone was moving the same as usual, filing off the bus, walking down the street, but it was like their steps were too deliberate, too synchronized. When I got to my apartment building, I practically ran inside, feeling a sense of unease gnawing at my chest. My neighbor, Jenny, was standing in the hallway fumbling with her keys. She smiled at me, but something was wrong with her smile. It looked forced, like her mouth was too tight, too strained, like she wasn't sure how to move her face anymore. "Long day?" she asked in that casual, neighborly way, but her voice was flat, hollow almost, like she didn't care about the answer. "Yeah," I mumbled, fumbling with my own keys. "You?" She blinked at me, too slowly. "Same as always." I went inside, closed the door, and stood there for a long time, my back pressed against the wood listening. Her footsteps didn't move. She stayed in the hallway for far longer than she should have, just standing there. I could hear her breathing. When I checked the peephole, she was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't that I felt watched, although that was part of it. It was more that everything around me felt wrong. The silence was too thick, too dense. I could hear the faintest hum, like the world itself was vibrating beneath my feet, waiting for something. I stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned, until I finally drifted into a restless sleep. And when I woke up the next morning, everything was the same, but also not. People were acting normal, or at least they were trying to, but as I walked to work, the cracks started showing. A man in a suit stood perfectly still at the corner, waiting for the light to change, but when I looked closer, I realized his eyes weren't blinking. He was staring straight ahead, unblinking, motionless, not even breathing. A woman with a stroller passed by, and I swear to God, the baby wasn't moving, just laying there, its eyes wide open, staring straight up, mouth slightly open in a frozen expression. At work, things were worse. My coworkers, people I'd known for years, were acting off. They'd smile too long, their mouths twitching at the corners. They'd laugh at things that weren't funny, and sometimes in the middle of a conversation, they'd stop, just stop and stare at me like they were waiting for something. At lunch, I asked my friend Mark if he'd noticed anything strange. "Strange?" he said, stabbing at his salad with his fork, his movements too mechanical. "Like what?" "I don't know. People, they're acting weird." Mark gave me a look, but his face didn't seem right. His eyes were too wide, his mouth stretched unnaturally. "You're just tired, man. Maybe you need a break." Maybe I did, but as we talked, I couldn't stop staring at his hands. They didn't stop moving, even when he wasn't talking. They twitched, flexed, tapped at the table, like they had a mind of their own. I looked around the cafeteria and suddenly I noticed it. Everyone's hands were moving, twisting, tapping, fidgeting, but their faces stayed perfectly still. I left work early that day, telling myself it was just in my head, but deep down I knew something was happening. The world wasn't the same anymore. People weren't the same. And the worst part, I could feel it starting in me too. That evening, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. My face looked the same, but I didn't feel like me. My smile didn't look right. I tried to smile, tried to make it normal, but the corners of my mouth stretched too wide, too tight, like I wasn't in control of it anymore. My hands were shaking, and not just from fear. They wouldn't stop twitching, jerking in tiny, uncontrollable movements. By the time I got to bed, my whole body felt wrong. My skin felt too tight, like it was stretching over bones that weren't mine. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to calm myself down, but the hum was louder now. I could feel it, like a low vibrating pulse under the mattress, in the walls under my skin. I closed my eyes, but it didn't help. The darkness behind my eyelids was alive, shifting and pulsing, full of shadows that shouldn't have been there. And just as I was drifting off, I heard it. A knock. It was faint but unmistakable. A slow, deliberate knock at my bedroom door. I sat up, heart racing, listening. Another knock and then a voice. "Let us in." It was my neighbor, Jenny. But her voice was wrong, just like her smile had been. Flat, hollow, like a recording. Another knock. "Let us in." I couldn't move. I couldn't. Then more voices joined hers. Mark, the old man from the bus, the woman with the stroller. Their voices, all layered together, echoing through the door. "Let us in." I pressed myself back against the headboard, trying not to breathe, trying not to make a sound, but the knocking grew louder, more insistent. Then the door handle began to turn slowly, deliberately. My heart hammered in my chest. The knob twisted with a soft click, but the door didn't open. I didn't breathe. "Let us in." Jenny's voice whispered again, but this time it was joined by others. Mark's voice, the woman from the bus, the baby's laughter, they all murmured in unison, voices layering over each other until it became a low, rhythmic chant. I pressed myself tighter against the headboard, feeling my skin crawl, every fiber of my body telling me to run, but I couldn't move. I just stared at the door, watching the handle twist back and forth like someone was playing with it. Then came the scratching. Soft at first, like fingernails dragging across wood, then louder, more desperate, scratches, scrapes until it sounded like claws raking the door from the other side. My throat tightened. My hands began to shake. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my chest. All I could do was press my hands against my ears, trying to block it out, but the sound, the voices, the scratching, was inside my head. "Let us in." My reflection flickered in the mirror across the room. I hadn't noticed it before, but now I couldn't look away. The dim light cast strange shadows on my face, and for a moment, it didn't even look like me. The scratching stopped. The door didn't move, but the air felt different now. Heavier, thicker, like I was underwater. I glanced at the mirror again. My reflection stared back, but something wasn't right. My smile was wrong. I wasn't smiling, but the reflection was. It stretched unnaturally across my face, too wide, pulling at the corners of my mouth. I blinked and the smile vanished, but the feeling stayed. The door handle clicked back into place and everything went silent. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know if it's them or if it's me, but every time I look in the mirror, I can see it. The twitching, the smile that doesn't fit, the way my hands won't stop moving. I think I'm becoming one of them. And I don't know how to stop it. Yeah, that's right. I heard my name in the woods. If you're Appalachian, you shuddered at the title of this alone. If you're not, I'll explain. My grandfather went to be with the Lord a few years ago now. He grew up in a small wooden shack a mile off the road. There's a small hellfire, brimstone, Pentecostal church off the main road. We attended there a few times with him for revivals, but oftentimes we would park there and walk to his small house. Along the road, he would tell us all kinds of spooky stories, which I'll perhaps share one day. He also told us about all kinds of stories through his life, about his parents and what it was like growing up in such harsh conditions. The conditions I'm talking about is probably what you expect to hear coming from poor Southerners in Appalachia. No power, cooking only over an open fire, etc. He also told us about how he would stuff hay through the cracks of the wood to try to provide some insulation against the harsh winters. The cabin wasn't much, probably 150 to 200 square feet. There were 2 bedrooms, and by that I mean one very large room, where the family would gather, eat, bathe, and the kids would sleep. The second room was where his parents slept, along the creek bed near his house. There was a fresh spring you could get water, and there was a house attached to a school bus where his uncle lived. It's been years since I had visited the house. Occasionally, we would have family meals out there for a picnic, bringing friends to come see the place. Some land disputes got in the way as the land had been split and divided and drug addicts had gotten into the mix. Grandpa went up there often during the last few years of his life to tear down fences people put up trying to keep us out. During those walks, my brother and I used to talk with Grandpa. He told us all kinds of superstitions, many of which I hold today. Examples would be to not show my teeth to a writing spider, or to close an open pocket knife. He also would tell me about things like hearing your name in the woods. In the words of Grandma, there are haints and boogers in the woods. I was visiting Grandma lately, and we were talking about Grandpa and the old cabin, and I got the itch to just go sit there for a bit and think. See, Grandpa really was the greatest man I knew. I figure maybe I could go sit on the steps to the old cabin. I could have some form of communication with him. Now, I didn't make it clear at the beginning of this post. The road to the cabin was somewhat accessible in a vehicle, provided you had a 4-wheel drive, which I did. But it make more sense to me now why we always walked it. Grandpa wanted us to have that quality time. So when I got off the main road, I parked my SUV at the church, thinking back on the times I'd see Grandpa lifting his arms and praising Jesus, about how the first girl I had ever loved used to go there, and how the preacher man would be running around the congregation feeling that Pentecostal fire. Getting out the car, I took a slow walk to the cabin. I enjoyed hearing the acorns under my boots pop and the leaves crunching, a few birds tweeting their familiar songs, and the water from the creek a short ways yonder. When I made it to the cabin, I had a bag of mixed emotions, I suppose. I missed Grandpa a whole lot. I was angry that the meth heads who lived nearby had littered the cabin with drink bottles, and I was bothered by the men who thought they should restore the property, when all they did was take away the character of the place my grandpa loved. I went by the creek and there it was, familiar. The school bus was still there. There was a bicycle wheel stuck in the ground that Grandpa would put a stick in when he was a young boy and roll around the property, and I filled my water bottle with some of that spring water. As far as I was concerned, that was holy water. After kneeling down for a quick prayer and let a small cry out, I decided it was time to make it back to my car. That's when I heard it. "Philip." It was almost a whisper. Surely I'm hearing things. Nightfall wasn't too far away and I brushed it off as a small fear, but then again a man's voice. "Philip." I now noticed I couldn't hear squirrels rustling in the leaf piles or the birds chirping. I tried to think. That wasn't any of my family's voices. Grandma was the only one who knew I came here, and she isn't the kind of woman to use a phone to tell family I had came by the old house. It couldn't have been any of the tweakers that lived on the edge of the property. None of them would know my name. "Philip," came a tone that was giggling and somewhat sinister. This was it. This is what my grandparents had told me about. There were haints and boogers trying to get me. I never knew what they meant by get me, but I sure didn't want to find out. I paced quickly towards my car. Mind you, it's only about a 15-minute walk. 10 if I jog. "Philip, Philip, Philip," the haint screamed. By now I started jogging. This would save some time and the sun was setting. "Philip," came up the noise, like how a man will jokingly make the vibrato that a female opera singer has. Lord only knows why I turned. I broke the rule and acknowledged it. "Who's there?" I asked. "Philip, Philip, 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 Philip." I closed my eyes and slapped myself a couple times. I was going crazy. None of this could be real. Then I saw something standing about 50 yards away. It was the size of a short man, and he had on a devil mask and cape. Very cartoonish, like something someone would buy for Halloween, holding one of those plastic red pitchforks. A distorted, mangled voice came from it, howling and laughing. "Philip." I know what you're thinking. Run. And that's what I did. I ran. I only had maybe a quarter mile left to the car. I ran like never before, and this thing was hot on my trail. "Philip," it sang out. It cheered as it tackled me from behind. It quickly flipped me on my back and started digging into me. They were not hands. They were claws. Skinnier than a nun's finger and sharper than nail. It drove both into my chest, scratching me all up and down and singing my name continuously. The primal noises that came from it and gleeful cheers mixed with the fast breathing of my name had to have echoed the woods. It eventually wrapped the claws around my throat. "Shh, Philip." I could see the strain in its eyes, and the pure hate this booger had. I chokingly reached for anything I could get and managed to get a rock. With any strength I had in me, I swung the rock into its head. Plastic didn't crumple from a Halloween mask, though. The rock caused a bludgeoned dent, like when you hear bone get hit through paper skin. As it rolled off me to howl, I managed to catch my breath and get up. There I ran as hard as I could. There wasn't much. I could see the car and the church. It took one last tackle at me and scraped my ankle on its way down, but I didn't. I made it to the church parking lot. The creature stopped where it was and wouldn't enter the lot. It just kept stomping and saying, "Come back, Philip. Come back. Come back, Philip. Come back. We need you, Philip." I climbed in my car and took off down the road, watching it dance by the moonlight in a circle with 3 others just like it. I, 21 male, stumbled across here a couple weeks ago and have been reading a lot of the posts. I thought I would share a story that happened about a year ago that has changed how I view living alone. At the time, I lived at my parents' house because the cost of living was so expensive. I was a university student working casual jobs and couldn't afford to move out. One day, my parents left to go on a business trip in France and decided to make a family vacation out of it. It was in the middle of exam period, so I couldn't go, but they took my 4 siblings. I was ecstatic since I could have the whole house to myself. They left early Monday morning. I looked forward to being the man of the house for the upcoming week. Everything was great until around 7 p.m. the next night. I was driving back home on a long, dimly lit road leading towards my street. Suddenly, I spotted a bald, shirtless man walking alongside the street carrying a shovel. Even though I saw him momentarily, his figure is etched in my brain. He was as pale as the moon and his eyes were lifeless and empty. We live in a suburban area far from any farmland. I couldn't imagine what someone would need a shovel for at this time of night. I kept driving, checking no one had followed me. I drove into the garage and closed the door. Of course, no one followed me. I chuckled to myself as I went about making dinner. By the next day, I had convinced myself that he might have just been lost or had dementia or something. Having 3 looming exams around the corner helped me forget about the man. I studied at home that day, which meant I got to practice a new prelude for piano. As I studied music theory, I studied hard, only to stop for food and the occasional YouTube video until I noticed the time. 7:30 p.m. Dang it. I muttered as I realized that I had forgot to bring my washing in. It would have to go in the dryer now. I grabbed a basket and went outside, soaking in the soft night sounds of crickets and rustles in the leaves. Suddenly I heard movement down my driveway. Moving quietly, I tentatively approached the end of the driveway, outlined by a perimeter of bushes. "Hey, who's there?" I asked nervously. No answer. As I waited near the bushes, I braced myself for a shovel to come towards my face. There was only more rustle of leaves, then silence. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for something to appear, but no one did. Returning to the clothesline, I grabbed the basket and went back inside, ensuring the door was locked behind me. It was now Wednesday, and I was more than just a bit nervous. I checked that every window and door were locked several times before leaving for university. I couldn't focus in class. I was still thinking about the man I had saw on Monday night. When I arrived home, I took out a packet of 2-minute noodles and watched Breaking Bad. We live in a bigger house, which unfortunately means it creaks a lot more on its own when no one is making any noise. The house is equipped with a motion detecting system, but I don't trust its accuracy, so I did laps throughout the house whenever I heard a creak that was a bit too loud. Every time I walked past the windows outlooking our backyard, I expected to see that pale face pushed up against the window looking inside. I wanted to call the police to just ask them to drive around my street and see if anyone was lurking, but I felt embarrassed for getting so worked up over no physical evidence. I decided against calling the police and shortly went to bed, accompanied by nothing but the howling wind outside. It was now Thursday, which meant another day of practicing at home. Having finished my practice at around 8 p.m., I got up to make myself a sandwich. As I gathered the cheese, ham, and lettuce for my sandwich, I paused to remember what I needed for school tomorrow. That's when I heard it. A singular, high-pitched piano note echo throughout the house. The blood drained from my face as I looked down the stairs of our home. I froze in fear, unable to move a muscle. Slowly I turned and saw the motion detector panel. It consisted of 6 lights. 1 for each room a sensor was in. I saw the lights for room 2, which was where I was, and room 6, which was where the piano was. They were flashing. All I could do was watch as the light from room 6 turned off, and subsequently, the light for room 5 began flashing. It was then when I could hear running down the hallway. Grabbing the knife on the bench, I ran for one of the bedrooms and lay underneath the bed. I could hear someone running up the stairs as I lay there. Walking around the kitchen table, they tapped their fingers on the bench. Holding my breath, I waited as he approached the bedroom I was hiding in. He entered the room, but all I could see were his legs. He stood there silently, peered into the chest, then turned and left. Now was my chance. I left the bedroom quietly, clutching at the knife. I crept down the stairs slowly. However, as I reached the bottom stair, a soft creak left the floorboards. I ran towards the front door, reaching for the keys that hung next to it. I could hear him coming as I tried to unlock the door. Once I flung the door open, I ran towards the end of the driveway, screaming for help. The police were shortly called, but couldn't find anyone in the house or in the nearby area. After giving the neighbors the description of the man I saw on Monday, I was told that the description sounded like someone who used to live a couple of streets away. However, he had gone missing 6 months ago. For the rest of the week, police patrolled my street for the next few days, but didn't find anything. But to this day, the image of the man walking down my street is permanently stuck in my mind. I've since moved out into my own place. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't check the house carefully every time I come home late at night.